We take life way too seriously.
This Monday, the Millennial Therapist, Dr. Sara Kuburic, is on Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers.
I love that, by the way. I'd love to hear it.
In a playful yet existential conversation all about self.
If I thought like, hey, I had to go through that so I can be me, first of all, no thank you. Next time I ask, I'd like to sign for a consent, like is there a consent form?
Being more lighthearted about life.
Like a good laugh is great medicine, you know? And you're like, okay, this is hilarious. Yeah. Cool, plot twist. Next.
And finding freedom in crafting our story.
You create yourself through your decisions, through your actions. And that's why being playful and engaging is so important, because that's the only way we actually construct our sense of self. It's so fun.
On an all-new Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers, a podcast dedicated to those seeking a more fulfilled and purposeful life through thought-provoking conversation, spiritual exploration, and authentic connections. The intentional movement has begun, and if you found yourself here, you are a part of it. Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers starts now. Hi, Dr. Kuburic. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. I am so honored to speak with you today and have you on the show and talk about really your life's work and what kind of this podcast has started out and has become about finding our authentic self and understanding who we are, which are really big topics, but I can't wait to hear what you have to teach us.
Thank you so much for having me. I am stoked to be here and just chat about my favorite topic ever.
Well, why is it your favorite topic? Like, what is it that drew you to this idea that we all want to, or like trying to understand who we are and this loss of self and really like finally owning like our reality, like who we are? What brought you to this space?
Yeah, there's kind of a joke in psychology that you should look at people's like thesis or their books and you'll know what they struggle with. And and it's not always accurate, but it sure was for me in terms of, I think I realized how painful, not just like uncomfortable or annoying, but how painful it can be not to know who you are or to feel completely disconnected from yourself or to feel like you're a stranger to yourself. And I think it was a journey that lasted like a decade to recover from something like that. And so in my work with my clients, I realized I wasn't the only one. I think whenever you're going through something, the natural human thing to do is like, wow, no one else will understand. I am the only person that has ever gone through this. And I think part of that is just like the isolation in our narratives. And the truth is so many people have experienced self-loss. So many people are struggling to figure out who they are. And so once I realized I wasn't the only one, I started speaking about it more publicly and more passionately. And I do think that it is the foundation of our existence. It's kind of like if you don't know who the main character is in a movie, the movie is incredibly confusing. And I think sometimes we don't know who the main character is in our own story.
Well, what is that like that so many of us just don't know who we are? I mean, I feel like there is something about us now today, and maybe it's just because I'm with you. Like this is something I've struggled with myself too. And so it feels very like on point, but because it's personal to me as well. But it feels like there is a big disconnection from self right now. Like so many of us are disconnected. And I don't know if it's just the way that we've evolved with technology, or just trying to people please. Like, I don't know what it is. It's definitely something that's fascinated me. And do you know why we are so disconnected, I guess?
And it's really hard to make statements like that because I don't know how they felt 100 years ago. We can just presume. Right? And there's always a part of me that thinks that sometimes we're privileged enough to have these existential crises in terms of maybe back in the day when there were like let's make sure we have food on the table. If that was your only priority, that's also how you identified. And maybe there was less like, I can be anything and I can do anything. So who am I? And what does that mean? Like choices do evoke anxiety. And I think a lot of people back then didn't have these choices, didn't maybe even have these questions because they didn't have these choices. And so, I'm not saying I preferred to have lived in a time where this was true, but sometimes I wonder if this also comes with more privilege, and a world that seems to be at our fingertips. At the same time, I do think what you said about social media and the way that we've developed society, I think it plays a huge part in why we're feeling this way. I think we're perpetually being told who to be,
Yeah.
and I think that that's a really big issue in marketing, in social media, in advertising, in TV, in by our families, by religion, by like li- everyone has a very, very strong idea of who we should be as human beings.
Yeah.
And it's really, really hard to then figure out who you are when you're trying to, as you said, please others or belong to a particular group or structure. And I think that part is getting incredibly overwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a combination. There's like so many different voices out there, like you said, that are, influencing us on who we want to be. But it's also one, it's scary to show up who we want to be. And I just don't think we even know where to begin. I don't think it's celebrated. And I don't think we really like are given the permission, it almost seems like, to be who we want to be. I mean, and I think that spans different cultures, that spans different years. I mean, people were having these conversations back 100 years ago. I mean, there are theologists that wrote things about this. So it had to have existed in a certain way, but
For
it is
sure.
definitely, I think, more well known and more talked about now just because of our ability to communicate so freely with so many others on such a wide scale. And we do have a lot more time on our hands. But I wonder what it is now that how we can change the narrative so that we can start celebrating our own authenticity and feel confident and courageous enough to understand who we are. Because I think this
Mm,
stems from like early on, and I'm not putting blame on parents because I'm a parent too and I have young kids. Like we're all messing our kids up in some way, shape, or form, I'm sure. But like, I know I could root back to things that happened to me in elementary school with friends that like, all I did is I wanted to fit in. And so I can only imagine like these are deep rooted things in us that like we don't really understand who we are and how do we begin to?
yeah. And I think, wanting to belong has received a bad reputation. And I think that's unfortunate
Mm,
because it is a really normal human want, need. Like, there's nothing wrong with wanting to belong. I just
mhm.
think teaching children to discern who they want to belong with, for me at least as a child, would have been a very helpful lesson. Because at some point we're like, well, we want to belong with whoever's around me and whoever seems cool at the time and whoever. And I think just even as adults, understanding that you will not belong with everyone, trying to belong with everyone, it's going to dilute who you are. And
Mm,
so you're going to have this natural instinct, this natural need, honor it, but be really incredibly picky.
mm,
And I think that there are settings and there are groups of people that will celebrate our authentic self, and then there's groups and people that won't. And so I think that that's really, really important when we talk about the sense of self. We kind of wish it can be done in isolation. I think there's a lot of like modern narratives of like, you go into a cave and you come out, you emerge your authentic self, and I love it. Don't have a cave around me. But the issue with that is that we're social beings, and that is not actually possible. Your sense of self is molded by society. Your sense of self is molded by the people around you. This is a fact. But what you do have power over is who you surround yourself with. And so for me, that's always like a first step of, okay, if you're not being who you want to be, look at the people around you. Are they conducive to you growing into that person? And they say you become like the five people you hang out with the most. I
mhm.
I think there's so much truth to that. So sometimes it's that's a pretty good starting point.
But what if those people you're around hold on to the version of you that you are, that you're trying to change? Because I
Mm.
see that. I've heard, I've had therapists talk to me about it, the crab in the bucket theory. You're trying to grow into yourself. You try to own a version of you that you might feel inside that other people don't see in you. And then they're going to kind of claw you back. No, no, don't let you go. I mean, there is a struggle in that just to grow into the person that you want to be sometimes.
Oh, yeah. And I think honestly, that was one of the I'm glad you brought this up. This is one of the hardest things for me during my journey. I, I think even at the very start or throughout most of my life, I would say, I felt like the way I experienced myself was not the way people experienced me.
Yeah.
And that was really weird or difficult for me because you start to feel a little crazy where you're like, this wasn't a weird thing to do, or this wasn't a mean thing to say, or this wasn't a, and people would just be responding completely opposite. And you just be like, okay, what is happening here? And I think there was a bit of that throughout my life. But then when I started changing, people really held on to the version of me that they saw. And like some people, I don't know if this has happened to you, it's like, remember in grade 7, you would do such and such. And it's like, are you joking? Like, I was 12 years old. Like, I don't understand. And people would just hold on to these pieces of you that maybe you weren't proud of, or that maybe never resonated with you. And when
Mm-hmm.
I started doing this work very seriously for myself, when I experienced kind of the pain of self loss, I was in my early 20s. And I remember being in therapy for like 2 years, doing all this work and still noticing that people were treating me the very same way. And people had the
Mm-hmm.
same assumptions, as if I didn't just undergo 2 years of therapy and didn't flip my
Yeah.
life upside down. And it was so incredibly discouraging and so incredibly frustrating because all you want to do is grab them and be like, oh my God, see me. Please
Mm-hmm.
see me. Park what you thought about me to the side and see the person standing in front of you. And unfortunately, here's the truth of it. Unless someone wants to see you, they just won't. It's not that you're not showing yourself, it's that they're refusing to see you. And that is such a painful thing that I had to let go of. I said, I am being vulnerable. I am showing myself, and this person chooses not to see me. And then there's going to be people that at first really struggle to redefine you in their mind, but they're going to do it. And for me, it was a game of endurance and perseverance. Of ultimately, I was changing for me, not for them. And I was going to live my life, and I crossed my fingers and toes, hoping that eventually people would catch on. And people that wanted to did. And those are the people that are still in my life. And people who didn't want to are not in my life. And so that was a really painful shedding. And part of this journey is incredibly isolating because sometimes you will see the most authentic you and no one else will at the time. And that's just part of that journey.
Yeah. I mean, I almost can cry thinking about that because I've experienced that same thing. And it's like, I've had it, you explained it so well because I've had it explained to me as, people will remember you or look at you. Well, I've heard two different versions of it. They look at you and they want to keep you in the box of the person that they either had the most control over. So they don't,
Ooh.
when you aren't your authentic self, you are easily controlled because you're trying to fit in. You're malleable. You want to, follow along with, whoever the person is. And then I've
Mhm.
also heard it described as people don't want you to change because it reminds them they're not changing and they love that version of you. So there shouldn't, there's nothing wrong with that version of you. So why would you want to change? We love that version. So there's like two very extremes I've heard, but it is really just more personal and it is isolating to go through because it's our human instinct to want to fit in, especially with people that we love and care about, which I don't think we care what the strangers think so much. It's like our family and our friends. And when we're changing,
Absolutely.
that's a hard thing to navigate, being like, this is the new me because this has always been me. I've been showing up as a different version of me. And I think that has been my experience. I realize I've shown up as a different version of me. So they don't necessarily know the real me because I didn't show it to them. So it can't even blame them. It's my fault for not even being me.
Totally. I love the taking responsibility piece of that. Absolutely. I also think there's a very unhealthy narrative of like, well, they should take it or leave it. Screw them. How dare they not
Yeah.
see it? And it's also like, give them a break. Like you're changing the other person in the dynamic, which means the dynamic
Yes.
has to change, the contract has to change, the script has to change. You're asking this person to start over, essentially. You're asking this person to mourn the relationship they had with you and start something completely different. That's a huge ask. Like, I know that the person who's feeling isolated is mourning and is figuring it out, and it's difficult for them, and we want to support. But I also want to have empathy for those around you, particularly those really close to you, such as family members. It's like you're asking them to fully change this relationship, and that takes time. And that takes a lot of understanding. And even if they want to, it's not going to be a really quick process. And so I
Yeah.
always say, like, you know, yes, there is those instances of manipulation and control. It's why they don't want to do it. And there's those people that are like, oh no, you just held the mirror up to me and now I have to change and then I want to do it. But then there's also people who are like, what the heck? What is happening? I'm so confused. How do I even how do I even relate to you now? Because you're showing up as a very different person, and I want to, but I am struggling. And for those people, I hope that we have some grace and give them time, because think about how long it took us to embrace ourselves and accept ourselves, but we're expecting others to do it in an instant, and that, I think, is a double standard. And I don't think that that's very kind. So if we want to preserve those connections, I think giving it some space and some room and some time is really, really important.
Yeah. I mean, we're not isolated. We don't operate on an island. So any sort of relationship, if you want to be seen, you have to understand that it is going to have some sort of a change, and there's going to be a friction. I mean, it is. It's just, you are changing the dynamics. But even like you said, like the whole taking it back to the responsibility, I think that's so huge that we do need to start taking responsibility. There's a huge narrative right now that talks a lot about like, oh, I was brought up this way, or the generational
Oh,
curse, or this or that, like all these things. And I'm very spiritual. I believe in that. I believe in certain things, energies being passed down. And I believe
yeah.
we can change the dynamic. But I also think we need to take responsibility for our own life here, where we are here and now. Like, we can't just say, oh, I'm this way because of this or because of them or whatever. I think we're all doing the best we can with
Yeah.
what we have. And we need to get out of this narrative of just like cutting people off or blaming them. And we need to start looking at ourselves as part of this getting to know who we are authentically.
Oh, so well said. And look, of
Ah,
course I believe in genetics. Things are passed down.
yeah,
Of course I believe in
yeah,
conditioning that's passed down, and environments that are, reenacted and passed down. Like, I do not minimize any of that. And yet you're responsible for the way you live your life. And I
yeah,
that's why I think a lot of these narratives are very disempowering. I think people like them because it gives them the answer to why, potentially their why, like, why is this happening? Why am I this way? And I think that's awesome. Great. You have an explanation, but it is at no means is it a justification. At no means does it now say you will just allow that to dictate your life, and you are not responsible for anything you do from now until you die. And I think this is like the nuance that's lacking, but it's a really important nuance. And in my book, I try to be like cheeky. I have an example of a guy named Chad who, when he was in high school, his parents got a divorce, which, by the way, serious, could be quite traumatic for some people.
yeah,
And for a lot of people, it is. Or he was, in college, and his first love cheated on him. Again, totally valid reasons to be upset and probably restructure how you see relationships. But now Chad is in his mid 30s, and Chad is mistreating absolutely everybody he dates. At what point is Chad responsible for how he treats the people he's dating? At what point does Chad have to go, hey, absolutely, these were incredibly painful experiences, but they do not justify the fact that now I am, doing X, Y, and Z in my relationships. And so I think when you look at it for dating, everyone's like, yeah, Chad really needs to get it together. And it's like, this does apply to like literally everything else. But then my favorite is people will be like, yeah, Chad really has to get it together because Casey, who's dating him, oh man, she's just so mistreated. I feel so bad for her. She deserves better. And then I go, no, 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 no. That is Casey's responsibility. Casey dating Chad, that's on her. That's a completely other, that's a different story. What you need to understand is that Casey needs to take responsibility for dating Chad. And Chad needs to take responsibility for mistreating Casey. Chad's taking responsibility does not take away Casey's. Anyways, and so then I'm like, let's park Casey on the side, but let's talk about Chad. Why do we want Chad to feel better? I don't want Chad to feel better so that he treats other people with more respect and so that other people are happy. I actually care about Chad. This is what we forget sometimes. It's like, no, I actually want Chad to be free, to feel loved, to feel genuinely connected, to have healthy relationships and dynamics that most of us need to have in order to have a fulfilled life. And so it's about Chad. And I find that responsibility is one of the most liberating, empowering concepts out there that people shy away from. And they always say you should take responsibility for others, when I actually think we need to take responsibility for the sake of our own well-being. And so I think part of like what I really try to do in my book in general in life is like, how do I change people's relationship to responsibility? Because we think it's like blaming. We think it's like, well, when you take responsibility, others will be happy. It's like, no, 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 you should take it so that you can be happy. And I think this is why we don't take it.
Yeah. I mean, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about it. It's like, it's such a game of chess because it's like this like individual aspect. And then there's this like, but we're so interconnected, yet we're disconnected. I don't know. I mean, this is like a really big, like mind, you know what, because it's kind of like, we do have to take the responsibility for ourselves and the way we treat others. But how we do that affects other people. Yet it is their responsibility to allow themselves to be treated that way. I feel like I'm like speaking from like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. My best friend's brother's boyfriend's girlfriend's, you know, like there's all the
good. It's so good.
it's like
so
this
true.
all interconnectedness. But like we do, it's so individual. And at the end of the day, when we really break it down, all we really do care about is ourselves. And that sounds very selfish. But I think it's a survival instinct. We can care about others and we can love others, but I think we always think about how what we do or what others do to us affect us. So we do need to take that responsibility aspect because it is such an individual thing, but it has such a ripple effect towards everyone.
For sure. I think it's that we care about ourselves, but also it's the only thing we have control over. Chad cannot control Casey. Let's take that as an example. He cannot fully take responsibility for her because he's not her. He doesn't have access or the freedom to her. So his responsibility to her also has to end. She has to take it for herself. And I think it's about, you only have control over yourself, truly. There's things you think you can control in life, and potentially there are things you can control in life. But the only certainty is the control over the self. And so that's why I think the limitations of responsibility exist, because you can only be responsible for that which you have control over. And I think that that's a really important distinction. That's why we can't take full responsibility for other people, because we don't have control over them. So there is like, that's a very generalized statement, but you see where I'm getting at.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes me think though, like I've spent my entire life trying to control everything. And that's been to my detriment because of that fear, you know, trying to control every situation, every relationship. And that never works. Why do we think we can have any sort of control outside of ourselves?
I love the trend, the Lulu trend. No, it's like we're a little delusional. No, I think we all seek safety. right? Like, and if we can't
Mhm.
have the safety, we will settle for the illusion of safety. And I think
Mm.
that control gives us the illusion. If only I do things this way, they won't leave me. If only I check their phone, I'll make sure that they don't cheat on me. If only I don't let my kids hang out with anybody, I'll make sure that they don't have any traumatic experiences like I did as a child. So, right, like it is
Mhm.
an illusion of safety, and I think that's why people generally want to control. It's not because they enjoy the exhaustion, the micromanaging, the a lot of people don't like to control but do it anyways because that is what they think will ensure that they're safe, that people around them are safe. It's
Mm.
very misguided, but unless you're manipulating or abusing individuals, it's usually well intended. It's just that you haven't thought it through all the way, and you're not fully sure what need you're trying to fulfill with it. um, you just kind of have the impulse to do it, and if anyone listening feels like they really need to control, I always go like, what is it giving you? And that, I think, is a really important thing to go back to, of like, what need am I trying to fulfill, and is there a healthier, more sustainable way to fulfill that need? And part of it is just realizing that life is chaos and unpredictable and uncontrollable, and leaning, as an existentialist, leaning into that absurdity. Because otherwise, I think this illusion of control is exhausting. And so, yes, people are like, isn't it just scary to kind of believe in the absurdity? Yeah, it is, but it's also incredibly liberating. Because it's like,
Mm.
and I think it's a bit more realistic to an extent.
Well, that comes along with what I've talked a lot about on the show is this whole concept of surrendering, like letting go and
Mm,
surrendering that everything always does work out for the best, in our best interest. It's always going to work out. You're going to wake up, well, not, I guess not all of us will wake up tomorrow, but most
mm-hmm.
likely you're going to wake up tomorrow. You're going to be okay. You know, granted, there are some situations where people are in unsafe scenarios. So this is like a very
Of
general
course.
statement,
No, I
but
totally get it.
for the majority of us, it's all
Mm-hmm.
going to be okay. Yet we
Mm-hmm.
create this fear that makes us want to control when we really truly have no control. So it's when we can come back to that surrender to, like you said, the absurdity or the illusion, that's when we can actually finally find peace. And I think when we find peace is when we feel more comfortable, courageous, and able to show up
Yeah.
as our authentic self.
Yeah, I think surrender is such an important one. And it's surrendering to yourself, surrendering to God, surrendering to the universe. Like, whatever you want to surrender to, you can choose that. But I think the way I talk about it is, it's essentially saying the same thing, just using different words, in terms of
Mhm.
like not taking life so seriously. I think I
Yeah.
was someone who was so serious and took everything so seriously. And I don't know if I believe things always work out for the best. I'm like, I mean, maybe for a lot of us, I think yes, but like again, it's that fun little existentialist within me that's like meh. But I do think that there is something about the fact that like we take life way too seriously, and I'm not really
Yeah.
sure why. Like it's like it's it's an interesting thing to try to conceptualize in a way that lets you not like, is it a play, is it like a blip in time in the universe? There's so many things I would stress about and get sick over and cry over during college, and if you ask me now to remember one and what it was about, I probably
Yeah.
couldn't. Absolutely not. Like and that's really putting things into perspective. So when I say don't take life too seriously, I'm not saying be hedonistic, don't take responsibility. What I'm saying is like put it into perspective that things you care about now, 5 years from now, probably won't matter. That however the situation plays out 5 years from now probably won't matter too much. The impact of that will be different than the impact it's having on you right now. And so I think that I think we should be more playful with life. Take responsibility, but be playful. And so many of us don't have the joy of living. And it's
Yeah.
not a playful thing. It's a very serious, very scary, very demanding existence. And then I'm not even surprised that people don't want to, you know, go do their boring thing every single day, like, and they want to just watch TV and numb out fully. And it's like, yeah, because your
Yeah.
existence is a little depressing. Like, it's a little hard, a little depressing, and sometimes that's life throwing it at you, and I respect that, but sometimes it's just us.
Well, I'm even thinking as you're saying that, yeah, I'm right there with you. I've always been a person that's taken things very seriously. It's only a very select few that get to see me in that playful, fun state. And like I said, I have young kids. They're always having fun and playful.
Mm,
At least for me, it's like I lost that somewhere along the way. And, I've had therapists ask me and I've had conversations where people are like, what do you like to do for fun? And it's like, for me, it's like, I want to do a puzzle. It's like, but I feel like a lot of people numb their version of fun is exactly what you said, is
yeah,
numbing out. We got to have a bottle
yeah,
of wine. We got to binge watch this show. Like, we have lost that connection to joy and life. And I mean, you don't live in the States. So, I mean, you're seeing it in a different place, but I've always kind of said that was more of a Western, part of the States. We're kind of just like all work, push, 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 this hustle culture. And I've always kind of idolized the whole European way of living. It seems like it's more relaxed, more joyful, more, time to actually live. But it sounds like you're saying that that's
yeah.
not even that.
Well, I mean, I grew up in Canada, so Canada and America, I would say, are
Yeah.
pretty much the same culturally,
Yeah.
so to speak. And now, I am based in Australia. And Australia, I would say, has a more European spin to it. Like, people love their beach. They're
Hmm.
going surfing. They don't care. They're going surfing. They're
Yeah.
having their brunch. They're doing their active walk. Like, a lot of, I mean, I'm stereotyping, but there is a lot more of a pull towards that. And then Europeans, every time I go to Europe, I go, wow, they're really doing it right every time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I am European. I mean, I come from that part of the world. And it's just like, every time I go there, I'm like, what are we doing wrong? Like, after I spent a couple of weeks in
Exactly.
Italy, I'm like, what on earth? But I think it's every culture has different values, is how I've conceptualized it. And, I always find that European cultures, and I'll speak maybe, to the Serbian culture, but family, eating meals together, experiences together, especially countries that don't maybe have the same financial means. It's not gifts, it's not things always. And so I think in America, we really idolize success, which we define by financial means and prestigious jobs and I love it because when I meet people in America, one of the first jobs will be like, what do you do for a living? When I go to Europe, sometimes they don't even know what I do. For like days we'll hang out and then they'll be like, what do you do? It's like, and I'm not even saying one is right and one is wrong, but it's just so interesting to see like the types of questions. Like, they'll be like, what kind of pasta do you like? What do you do in your free time? What's your hobby? Like, oh my gosh, who's your favorite composer? Like, these are the types of questions that they're super passionate about. In America or Australia, they'd be like, what neighborhood do you live in? That's like a big thing here. Then they can kind of conceptualize you, like, where did you go to school? And so I think every culture, it's
Yeah.
so easy to see what we value based on like the first questions you ask people when you meet them. And so I think America does have the hustle culture probably more than anywhere else, which so resonates with me, by the way. That's the problem. I feel like I'm that kind of person,
Yeah.
so I would run myself into the ground if you let me, and America lets me, because it's like, yes, keep going, and
Hmm.
I'm like, okay. And so I actually figured out, like, I have to be in cultures that like go against my instinct to do that in order to have like somewhat of a balanced life.
But is balance even real? Because I mean, I'm right there with you. I'm the person
Yeah,
that's
I
just like,
know.
if I'm doing something I love, I can wake up in the morning, start it until I go to bed. And if I go out to do something quote unquote fun or take a step away from like my passion or my work or what I'm doing or having a conversation like this, all I could think of is like, I got to get back to work. I want to do this. I want to do that. Like, what am I going to do next? So I don't know if that's part of my makeup or if that's just being brought up in this culture. I don't know. But, sometimes like this idea of what is fun is elusive to some of us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And I don't think we've ever been encouraged to explore what's fun for us. Sometimes we do things because we think it should be fun. For example, I'll use a silly one. Everyone loves to spend the day at the beach here in Australia.
Hmm.
Um, that much heat at once is not it for me. Like, I love the beach. I want to go for like 2 hours and like surf and swim, grab a coffee, have a brunch, and leave. But like, that's the definition of fun. And I think it's always so interesting to be like, but that's not fun for me. And I think actually realizing what's not fun for you is really important, because I don't want to come home even more drained and sunburned. Like, that's not a thing. And so I think, as adults, we're not really, as a kid, your parents were like, well, let's try this. Have you tried that? Let's see if you like this hobby. Wow, you seem whatever, and you're really getting them to explore what they want to do, and we just don't do that for each other. And I think it'd be great to grab a girlfriend, a friend, whatever, and just be like, every weekend or every other weekend we spend 2 hours trying something new. Like, let's go make a pottery thing. And I understand that not everyone can do this, or like, let's go for a hike, or let's go and like give yourselves a chance to play and to explore what you actually deem fun.
Mm. So, what happens, do you think, to us when we allow ourselves to explore the more playful side of life?
I think we connect with ourselves more deeply. I think that with playfulness comes creativity, comes the habit of doing something that's new and maybe uncomfortable, the opportunity to fail, an opportunity to, deeply connect to maybe a version of us that is feeling super disconnected. I just think there's so many benefits to exploring life and tasting life and living life. And I like to say exhausting life. Oftentimes life
Mm.
exhausts us, but I think we should be exhausting life. We should be taking everything we can out of it. And I think that that's incredibly meaningful. So at the end of the day, I think this playfulness actually leads us to a form or a sense of meaning.
Yeah. Do you think we find more fulfillment from it when we can like experience that more joy and that more fun of life? And to me, that is what my mentor has always taught me. That is our connection. When we have fun, when we get creative, that is what connects us to our spirit. That is what gives us our divine guidance. That is what leads us to our
Mm.
purpose. But I find that it is very foreign to us, like you said, having even the idea of like going out on different weekends and trying to explore new things is scary to people because it's new. One, you're going to fail. But then I don't know that necessarily we always want to hear that inner guidance. I don't know that we always want to connect with the answers or the truth of where we should be going in life or what is in front of us, because
Oof.
we might be dismissing it. Like, I know people in my life that stay extremely busy so that they don't have to sit with themselves and understand
Mhm.
what's going on.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of people don't explore because they don't want to gain deeper awareness, because deeper awareness asks for change. I don't know
Mm.
if it's rare that we get a deeper awareness and are like, oh, my awareness has told me I need to be exactly where I am and nothing has to change. It's rare, it happens. But a lot of the time, it's like that awareness is saying, hey, look, here is how we should be doing it differently. And so many people, and I understand it, are exhausted from their lives that the last thing they want to do is try to implement a change. And so many people don't want to hear truths that they need to hear.
Mhm.
Um, and that's because it's painful. That's because it will require effort, whatever the reason is. And so I think you're right. This is one of the reasons we don't even tap into the joy of things. And I think sometimes when you experience the joy, you intensify the sorrow. So if something's not working for you and you just had like the best day, for example, with your girlfriends, and you come home and you're having the worst time with your boyfriend, just the worst, like your
Mhm.
body, like you just feel like crap. I think that discrepancy would be so eye-opening, and it would make being home with your boyfriend even harder. And so that's a silly example, but I think that that's kind of why sometimes people don't want to feel the good, because then he also amplifies the bad. And so I think for me it was really important to get in touch with my non-serious self, because I think we're such holistic beings. And by not tapping into this creativity, this intuition, this playfulness, I couldn't have been connected to myself. So it was part of that journey of like recovering from self-loss. And I always say, you don't find yourself, you create yourself. I don't like the find concept because I find it too passive. I also, what I don't like about it is I feel like that means someone other than you has decided who you're going to be. And now you just get to step into it. But how's that any different than society telling you who to be? We would like to think that
Yeah.
whoever did that is, maybe a higher power. I don't know but it's always like, I'll find myself and she's already there. And I don't like that concept because of the passivity, lack of responsibility, and the imposition that comes with that sort of statement. So for me, it's like you create yourself through your decisions, through your actions, through the way that you present in the world. And that's why being playful and engaging is so important, because that's the only way we actually construct our sense of self.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are creators. We create our own reality. Our reality is our perception, how we perceive it. We can each be perceiving this conversation in a completely different way and
Totally.
walk away and tell like different people. So like
Yeah.
our perception is our reality, and we're creating that every step of the way. But I wonder if that makes me question, because I wanted to ask you if you thought that we go through certain things as, like, I know you went through a lot as a child. Do we go through that stuff, in your opinion, so that we can find our purpose and that we can find, like, you wouldn't be where you are today if you didn't go through the things you went through as a child? Same here, all of us. Like, do you think that? But now you're
Correct.
saying is like,
Yeah.
that would be giving the power over to someone else, that they made you, they created you, or they told you who you were going to be. So I'm guessing no, that the answer would be no.
The answer is no. I mean, I don't think I would be who I am. I mean, I don't think, of course, if I didn't live through childhood trauma and wars, I wouldn't be who I am today. But it doesn't mean, sorry, I'm like, no. But it doesn't mean that I wouldn't be an authentic version of myself. It just means I would be a different authentic version of myself. And I sometimes think that, we become ourselves despite the things that have happened to us. And again, yeah, if I thought like, hey, I had to go through that so I can be me, oh, first of all, no thank you. Next time ask, I'd like to sign for a consent. Like, is there a consent form? Is there a, and people are like, well, your hardships have, and I'm not that person. I'm not like, be so grateful and blessed that you went through this really, really crappy thing so you can be who you are today. No, but I deeply respect people who have gone through things and still managed to use it in a way that honors them and those around them. I think that there is something really powerful of experiencing hard things and not letting it harden you. And I don't know if I'd still been in the same path. I don't know if I'd be as good of a therapist. I don't know if I'd have the same heart for it if those things didn't happen to me in my childhood. But I would like to believe that an alternate Sarah would still be authentic and still have fulfillment and still have meaning. And actually, this is kind of an interesting thing. When I was a child, I didn't want to believe the wars impacted me in a negative way. So I didn't realize this was trauma till my mid-20s. I was in grad school being a psych, and I was like, nah, that didn't impact me. Nope, not a big deal. Nah. I had to have my therapist sit me down and be like, you understand this was traumatic, right? And I was like, well, is it? Like, are we sure? And she just stood there shocked. Part of that was because it was so normalized, right? With my whole family having gone through it. Like, it just became like remember that time we went on a road trip? That was remember that time we were in the bomb shelter? Like, it was so normalized that, like, to me, it wasn't like that big of a deal, quote unquote. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack here, but we won't right now. The point is, I was like, hey, no. And I had to sit with myself and be like, you're a fairly intelligent person, Sarah. Why haven't you seen this reality? And the answer was, I felt like the wars harmed so many things and people I loved that the they that hurt us took away so much from us. This is like 9-year-old Sarah, but I didn't want to give them me. I felt that by admitting that they impacted me was another thing they won and another thing I lost. And that was a very serious thing because I was like, I can't let them win again. I can't let them change and destroy my life because that's another life they took. And the reasoning, fine. The way I went about it, not so much. So I thought that by pretending it didn't happen, I preserved my sense of autonomy and I could be like, see, you didn't do anything to me. When in reality, facing it, going through it was the only way for me to go, hey, yes, this happened, but I can happily say that you're no longer dictating my life and I'm free from you. So the reasoning was always there. And I understand that passion with the teenage, early 20s Sarah of like, I'm going to rebel against this and how dare you take my life. But I didn't know how to execute that in a healthy way. And so I think sometimes, I have no idea why I started telling the story, but it was relevant to something we talked about. It was like, I don't know. There was something we were saying. I swear it was relevant. No.
Well, we were talking about how when we go through things, it helps us to become the person we are going to be. But what you're saying,
there you go.
I've seen, what you're saying, I've seen with people on such different levels. Like maybe it wasn't their family went through a war, but they've gone through things. I had this conversation with my mother-in-law not too long ago where she's like, oh, we don't all have traumas and I don't have traumas. And I looked at her and I named off like 4 or 5 things on my hand. I was like, this. Those are all pretty traumatic. She's like, oh yeah. Like we do that. We compartmentalize things. I mean, these were traumatic, like seriously traumatic events that would that happened in her childhood and her early age. Like it would shape the way you looked at the world. And she was just like, oh yeah, you're right. But it becomes such a part of our narrative. I think that we don't allow it to seep in and make a big deal and about things. I think we've all gone through something on some sort of scale that has traumatized us in some way. It could have just been, someone called you a name on the playground in elementary school.
Oh my God,
and it sat with you forever. I know I lost one of my best friends. One of my best friends, I think it was 6th grade, moved right when we were going to a new school. There were 3 of us. Like that was one of the most traumatic things in my life. I felt like I was just abandoned. I had there were 3 of us and one of them left. And it just it was at such a developmental age. Like I will never, I could cry now thinking about it, it doesn't have to be that we went through a war, but it does affect us and it does change how we become the way we are. So, I don't know if we have to go through that to find our purpose in ourselves, but it definitely impacts us.
No, but we all have it. So I don't know what it means. Like we don't have to go through it. It's like we all have it. So I think we just get to choose what our relationship is to it. If it's going to dictate our lives or if it's just going to inform our lives. And I think when we choose that it's going to inform and not dictate, I think that's where the liberation and the healing happens. And as you said, everyone has something that has hurt them. And I understand that my example is super extreme and not a lot of people can relate to it. Thankfully, by the way, I really hope whoever's listening can't relate to it. But it doesn't have to be a big thing. And it's also not like a pain Olympics. We're not being here like, well, I had this trauma and you had this trauma. It's like anything that was hurtful to you, anything that has left a wound is something that you're going to have to figure out, heal from, and choose how it informs you. And everything is equally significant. So I do think that that's a really important point.
So how do you find that people actually decide that they want to go in and work on this stuff or that are willing to become more aware? Because I feel like there's a certain type of person that will, but a majority of us want to numb out and not have these conversations or go there. Like, what is the difference do you see in people that are willing to try and do the work?
So a lot of the people do the work when they have to, myself included. It's when something is not working, their relationships are not working, or they're experiencing some depression or some anxiety, or They keep having same arguments with their family. Like most people are not coming into session, or most people are not being like, and now I need to like reconnect with myself and figure out that relationship. Most people see the manifestation of the disconnect, want to work on whatever the manifestation is, and then Sarah comes and goes, well, actually, let's and like take it back a notch. That's like, do you know what? And that was the same for me. Like, I think, yes, there's people who are incredibly like, hey, I don't know who I am. Let me figure that out. But that's quite rare. And I think those individuals would have to notice how it's impacting their life. They would have to feel some discomfort in order to do that, probably. Most of the time I developed a panic disorder for a couple of years, and that's why I started therapy. Even though I was like, I hate myself, I don't know who I am, I don't like my life, there's no way I would have gone to therapy unless I got a panic disorder. No way, which is mind-blowing. But I was like, I'm in pain, I need the pain to end. And that's how I find that a lot of us who do stumble upon this work, like personal work, it's like at some point we realized the pain was a lot. Pain was not something we wanted. And so we started unpacking, and then we probably got into like the self-work through it. Rarely do I see people just off the street have like a decent life and be like, I just want to know who I am, and just like rock up to therapy and like start unpacking. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's really rare to see something like that.
So do you think the work is ever done? Do you think we ever fully like actualize ourselves?
No. I like mine. No. So I love.
I need to go back to journalism school. Yes or no answers you're not supposed to ask.
No, I will expand. I love it because I know there's a lot of like teachings and especially like spiritual teachings that talk about like self-actualization, which I very much respect. Here is my, like, I love Kierkegaard. He was like, I think it was him who said it, like, you can look in a mirror and you can say, this is who I am right now. You can't look in a mirror and go, this is who I am, period. Because who you are is always becoming. There's a part of you that hasn't become yet. So the self-actualization, I guess, depends how you conceptualize it, is like, I think we're perpetually becoming. And I don't think that we ever actualize. I guess your final actualization act is when you die. That's when the future and the past and the present meet. But for me, I don't think the work ever ends. But that's the fun of it. I'm like trying to induce some enthusiasm. That is the fun of it. If someone's like, Sarah, I will tell you exactly how you're going to live your life for the next 30 years. And who you are today is exactly who you're going to be by the time you die. I don't really think I'd feel very motivated. No. And so I hope that I'm not the same person 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I want to keep meeting her. I want to keep creating her. I want to keep molding her. And so I don't know how I feel about self-actualization, because I think that gives that illusion of like, and now you're done and you get to relax. And again, it depends how people define that word. But what about you? Do you think that people self-actualize?
Well, no, I don't. And it's one of the things I hate most about the self-help and spiritual world, which I'm very deeply involved in, is this whole concept of like, it makes me cringe, like be your best self, or you're striving to be this best version of you. All I think it does is add in this extra layer of perfectionism that we don't need. I think we are literally showing up every day the best we can with whatever circumstances are.
Yes.
And that can change day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour. Like one thing can change in every aspect. And so I think we need to give ourselves grace and stop striving for this elusive perfection that just doesn't exist. That's my feel on it. And I think it's really harmful for us all to be talking about, embodying our best self. Like, yes, let's do our best with what we can in every moment. And I think we should constantly be learning and growing. And I think there's more connection. I think there's more involvement. And I think we can learn and grow and expand our awareness and knowledge. And to me, expanding that awareness and knowledge, weirdly, like self-help to me is fun. I can't get enough of the learning and the growing. So, I mean, maybe I'm one of those weirdos, but no, I mean, I was led to it because I wanted to change things in my life. So I was led to it, but exactly. I don't think I could ever stop it at this point.
Yeah, and I love that, by the way. I'd love to hear it. No, but the best self, I think, is such a weird thing to say. Like, as you said, it's a
I
layer of
know.
perfectionism and it's a pass fail sort of life test. And
Yeah.
I think we should strive to be our authentic self. And your authentic self is going to F up. Your authentic self is going to
Yeah.
have to take responsibility for mistakes. And life is going to persist to be hard and messy and sometimes crappy.
Hmm.
I don't understand what the best self means. I guess they mean
No.
authentic self, but I think that wording can be so, so damaging and so unnecessary. And even like new year, new me. What?
Hmm.
Like your old you is not going anywhere. Like it is, she's there. Like the clock is
Hmm.
going to strike 12 and nothing's going to happen because this is not
Hmm.
Cinderella and things are not going to pop back into a pumpkin. You know, like your decisions will shape you. And also, why do you want to be a new you? I don't know what that means. Do you not want to evolve? It's like shedding everything. I find these concepts so interesting that we've commercialized them to such an extent that that's how people like see their own sense of self. And I do think that there needs to be a bit of restructuring in society so that we're not striving for perfection and we're not trying to run away from who we were up to this point.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is it, actually, as you're saying it, and I'm hearing you repeat that back to me, it sounds like almost like escapism. Like we look at this as
Yeah.
a way to escape what's not working or what we don't like about our life. Where we do need to embrace that messiness and just move on with it and make that part of it and have fun with that. When we can laugh at the shit storm that is our life, it
For
becomes a lot
sure.
more fun.
A lot more fun. You need to see the joy in it. Sometimes, and this is not a good coping mechanism, but sometimes when things are really bad, I'll just start laughing. Like I will laugh at the absurdity of the situation, and I'll just like burst out laughing. And like a friend of mine was like a couple months ago, just telling me all the unfortunate events that happened in her life, and I looked at her and I just like burst out laughing, just like, and then she started laughing, and then we laughed, cried. And then I was
Yeah.
like, okay, let's talk about it. And she's like, that felt so good. And that's because it's like,
Yeah.
you can't take this seriously. Like, all of
Yeah.
this is so horrible and so nonsensical. You can't take that seriously. So, like, part of it is funny. And now
Yeah.
let's seriously talk about it and see what we can do to help you. And I think if we could laugh at ourselves and laugh at problems more often, by the way, this was contextually appropriate. She was one of my best friends. I am not just like laughing at people when they tell me bad things. But like, I knew she saw life the way I did. And like, a good laugh is it's great medicine, you know? And you're like, okay,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
hilarious. Cool,
Yeah.
plot twist. Next.
Yeah, let's treat our life like the rom-com that we want it to be and do the laugh cry.
Exactly.
And that just totally like helps regulate everything about ourselves and our nervous system. So how do we get in touch with you? How do we get your book? How do we follow along? I know you have the biggest following on social media
Oh,
and you have
you're
such
so
great
sweet.
wisdom that you share with everyone. So share with us how we can follow along with you and order your book.
Oh, thanks. So you can order my book. It's called It's on Me. It's all about self-loss and creating yourself. You can find that anywhere books are sold, and I think it's currently being translated to 16 languages. So hopefully you'll be able to find
Wow.
it worldwide, which is really exciting. I'm most active on Instagram, so because I'm a millennial, and my handle is millennial.therapist. And then I also have 2 Substacks, which is more like a newsletter essay type format, and I love it because it gives me a bit more time to sink my teeth into some of these more complex topics. So it's more like psychology from an existential lens. So if you're really into nerding out on some philosophy, there's a Substack called Notes from My Phone, and that's psych content with a bit of philosophy. And then there's one called The Phenomenological Society, which is essentially where I just teach people a bit about psychology and philosophy and philosophers. And it's just like kind of fun if you want to nerd out and this is new for you. So there you go.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today and going on these like
Oh,
random
my
conversation
pleasure.
trips.
Loved
I
it.
love these kind of conversations.
It's so
I'm the
fun.
nerd out kind. I love like the deep conversations, but then we can laugh too. So thank you so much.
Exactly. Thank you for having me.
And that's it for today's Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Dr. Sara Kuburic, for the great conversation, all about learning to take personal responsibility for our life and finding the joy in living it. If you want to work with Dr. Sara Kuburic, get her book, or follow along in her journey, I'll put all the information in the show notes below. And as always, you can find Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers and Intentional Media on our website at CourtneyMyers.com. That's where you'll find our books, our courses, and everything else we have going on. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.